The rain poured relentlessly, beating against the windshield of the family's car as they made their way down the winding, unfamiliar road. Laura, sitting in the passenger seat, checked the GPS on her phone for what felt like the 100th time, but the screen was blank. Their signal had been lost hours ago, and they were officially in the middle of nowhere. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the dense forest surrounding them. Her husband, James, was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Their two children, Emma and Noah, sat silently in the back seat, eyes wide with fear as thunder rumbled ominously overhead. They had been driving for hours, searching for somewhere to stay as the storm grew stronger, but they had yet to find any sign of life. Just as hope was beginning to fade, they spotted a dim light through the sheets of rain. "There!" Laura exclaimed, pointing. James squinted through the downpour, and sure enough, a large building loomed in the distance. It looked like an old hotel, its Victorian architecture dark and foreboding against the stormy sky. A neon sign flickered near the entrance, the word hotel barely visible under layers of grime and decay. As they pulled up, the family exchanged uneasy glances. The hotel looked abandoned, its windows dark and paint peeling from its walls. But with no other options and the storm showing no sign of letting up, they decided to take their chances. James parked the car, and they made a run for the entrance, shielding themselves from the rain. Inside, the air was stale and musty, thick with the scent of old wood and dust. They stepped into the lobby, which was eerily empty and dimly lit by a few flickering lamps. The room had a strange, timeless quality, as if it had been frozen in place for decades. A grand staircase led to the upper floors, and an ornate chandelier hung overhead, its crystals gleaming faintly. To their surprise, a man stood behind the reception desk, wearing a dated bellhop uniform. He was tall and thin, his face pale and expressionless. His eyes seemed to linger just a bit too long on each of them. Laura shivered under his gaze. "Welcome," he said in a voice that was almost a whisper. "Do you need a room for the night?" "Yes, please," James replied, his voice unsteady. He could feel the weight of the man's gaze on him, cold and unblinking. The bellhop handed him a single, heavy brass key. "Room 304, he murmured. "Up the stairs, down the hall to the left." The family hurried up the stairs, each step creaking beneath their weight. The hallway was dim, lined with doors on either side. Faded wallpaper adorned the walls, and the carpet was worn and stained. When they finally reached room 304, James unlocked the door, and they filed in quickly, relieved to be away from the unsettling silence of the hallway. The room was modest but clean, with a single bed and a small sofa. A dusty painting hung crooked on the wall, depicting a misty forest that looked oddly familiar. Laura frowned at it, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. The children settled down on the sofa while James and Laura sat on the edge of the bed, too uneasy to relax. Outside, the storm raged on, the sound of rain hammering against the windows. They tried to talk, but something about the place felt wrong. Eventually, exhaustion overtook them, and they drifted into a restless sleep. When they awoke, the sunlight was streaming in through the window. Laura stretched and glanced around the room, her heart sinking. Something was different. The bed felt cold, and the familiar hum of electricity was absent. She turned to wake James, but he was already sitting up, a look of confusion on his face. "Where are we?" he murmured, rubbing his eyes. The room was empty, stripped of furniture, the walls bare. The children, who had been lying on the sofa, were now on the cold, dusty floor. They looked around, bewildered. Laura's pulse quickened as she looked at the door. It stood open, revealing a hallway that was no longer carpeted and welcoming, but dusty and covered in cobwebs.